This is your Wednesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Plenty to get to today on the show. Randy Johnson covers Gopher football for the Star Tribune. Will join me here in just a little bit to talk Gopher football recruiting. Today is signing day for the early period. Gophers have a pretty good haul this season. Let's see what they're able to do down the road with some of the guys they're bringing in right now. A lot of these guys probably don't help right away, but winning this year, winning, 2 of the last 3 years probably helps them recruit some of these better players. So we'll break that down with Randy and just how, recruiting has changed because of the transfer portal. Get into some listener questions. We'll get into some Gophers men's basketball. Yeah, they played last night and won again. Wild postponements, Steph Curry breaking the record, and a goalie matchup that had a decided South Metro, Minneapolis-St. Paul flavor to it. But first, what did I miss? I want to start, maybe a weird time of year to start with this, but I want to start with an NFL mock draft that came out just the other day from Todd McShay over at ESPN. It's his first kind of early predictions for the 2022 draft. And again, take these with a grain of salt. I believe, 1 year poor Todd McShay had Mitch Leidner as a possible first-round pick. I think that was his way too early right after the draft before, the 1 year out draft. This one's at least we've seen a college season, another college season from a lot of these guys. It's notable to me, though, not so much in who he's got going where, but kind of how Todd McShay, who studies these things far more closely than I do, how he sees the quarterback pool in 2022. Because let's face it, if things break a certain way for the Vikings, let's say they don't make the playoffs, which is the most likely scenario at this point, and they have a regime change, which I think is certainly on the table as well, it's much easier to imagine a Kirk Cousins trade. I think he's tradable. I think he would bring back some assets. He would only cost the Vikings $10 million on the cap, dead cap next season if they traded him. Another team would absorb the $35 million left on his contract. Perhaps they would extend him, but Kirk Cousins has played well enough this season to be a trade commodity. And if this is a team that, wants to start over, does not make a single bit of sense to me to keep Kirk Cousins on the roster. Even if he's played well this year, I just don't see him as the long-term fit if a new regime comes in. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about that. It just doesn't feel like that would be the way you build a new contending team. You kind of want to start over at that point, and why do you keep your $45 million quarterback, or why do you extend him when we think we've seen kind of what he has to offer? So with that as a backdrop, I think a Kirk Cousins trade this coming offseason is very much possible. And if you're going to do that, you're going to need to start over at quarterback. And maybe you don't draft your quarterback right away. Maybe you do. But this is the interesting thing to me. Now, McShay has the Vikings taking Ahmad Gardner, a corner, at 15th overall, corner from Cincinnati. And that would be ironic if there is a regime change, because Mike Zimmer loves himself a good tall corner. And Gardner, who they call Sauce, is 6'2". Plays a lot of press coverage, big physical corner. That would be a perfect fit for his defense. Hard to say, though, if he will be around to lead it. Now, just one more, maybe, but the quarterbacks are more interesting to me. And the Vikings are picking 15th in that scenario. That's where the draft order has them right now. Let's just assume that is around where they are going to finish this year. Could be a little bit higher, could be a little bit lower. This is the really interesting thing to me. McShay has 5 quarterbacks going in the first round of the 2022 draft. He has them going number 12, Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh. Number 13, Matt Corral from Ole Miss. Number 17, Malik Willis from Liberty. Number 19, Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. And number 25, Sam Howell from North Carolina. The names and everything, the exact order, don't mean all that much to me right now. Like I said, this is a crapshoot. A million things are going to change between now and when the draft happens. What is interesting to me is that Todd McShay, who looks at these things far more closely than I do, has 5 quarterbacks kind of right in the range, 4 in particular, 12 through 19, who he projects as being first-round picks. So, there's maybe not that home run, top 5, number 1 overall quarterback talent like there has been in past years, really recent years like Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, but it does seem like there's at least enough depth, even if we're not calling this a great quarterback draft, to warrant 4 or 5 quarterbacks being taken in the first round, all of them right around the spot where the Vikings will be choosing. So if they want to go that route, if they don't want to keep Kirk Cousins, if they don't think Kellen Mond is the long-term answer, if they want a couple young quarterbacks in there and want to throw a first-round pick at it, this could be a year to do it. This could be a maneuver they would make because there should be a quarterback available to them based on what we know right now.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Happy to have Randy Johnson back on Daily Delivery. Gave him a full week off before I bugged him again and said, Randy, let's talk college football recruiting. Wednesday is signing day. Gophers football team currently, I believe, has, at least as of recording on a Tuesday, I believe they have 19 commits. They are number 7 in the Big Ten, according to 247 Sports, and 36th nationally. Sounds pretty solid. Randy, maybe talk me through what you see in particular in this class and kind of how it stacks up.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Recruiting has changed quite a bit now with the transfer portal. So you're not seeing as many teams go with the, say, 25 man classes. Gophers right now, they had those 19, and then they have one transfer they picked up over the weekend. So they're sitting at 20. They could end up adding some later. I think PJ Fleck's leaving some wiggle room in there. They had a very good experience in the transfer portal this year with getting guys like jet linebacker Jack Gibbons, defensive tackle Niles Pinckney, 2 very productive players on the offense. Wide receiver Dalen Wright, also from Texas A&M. So it's something you'll be seeing a lot more in college football. And this year it really exploded. It seemed, with the first really, really full year of it coming about, and everybody kind of, instead of just dipping their toe in the water, a lot of people jumping in pretty good.
Like I said, 19, actual, commits coming from high school. Doesn't seem like a ton of in-state recruits this year, but one of the headliners is Eden Prairie defensive lineman Trey Bixby. What do we know about him? He's a 4-star. Looks like he's the second best recruit in the state, according to 247 Sports, and he's the national number 40 at his position. What do we like about him? It seems like there's plenty to like about him.
I think it was Trey. It's a lot of potential. He transferred in from St. Edward in Cleveland, Ohio. An Ohio Power state champion again there this year. He showed a lot early in his career, especially as a sophomore. He's battled some health situation, and this year he was slowed quite a bit by a high ankle sprain early in the season. Ended up playing 6 games. He was productive for Eden Prairie. He's someone who you look at the size, the 6'5" frame and everything there. A lot of potential with him. I think that's where you're looking at his high ranking there.
Another 4-star recruit also on the defensive line. Both of their 4 stars are defensive lineman Anthony Smith from Pennsylvania. Again, that 6'5" frame, that seems to be what everybody is looking for these days.
Yeah, this guy is he's been pretty productive out of Shippensburg. He checks in at about 280. He had 6 sacks, 14 tackles for loss this year, and his team's 11-1. So, he's a guy that he's shown a lot on the field, and I think they'll be pretty happy with him when they get him in here.
Like I said, I don't see a ton of in-state recruits here. We go down to a wide receiver, Kristen Hoskins from Alexandria, and Joe Gerlach from Woodbury. But, outside of that, looks like, Tony Nelson from Tracy and then Spencer Alvarez from Columbia Heights. But outside of that, it seems like they largely recruited outside of Minnesota, which, you get that from year to year. Maybe it wasn't a huge abundance of prospects. Maybe they went elsewhere. What do you make of that aspect of things this year?
Yeah, I think Minnesota, it might be down a hair bit this year. They did go after some guys, didn't get them, particularly the Marshall, Minnesota lineman, Dalen Hazert, who's going to Iowa State. That's one that they were hoping to get earlier this year. So they're basically they're trying to put together what they can. They didn't get all the Minnesotans they would have wanted to, but I don't know how many they actually would have had that they were going after too.
Obviously, quarterback is a big, obviously the biggest kind of recruits you can get in a position they are going to need to solve in the future. I mean, with Tanner Morgan back next season, not necessarily in immediate need. What can you tell me about their quarterback recruit from South Dakota, where I believe you are from as well, right?
Indeed. Yep. Jacob Knuth from Harrisburg, South Dakota. He's basically he committed to them last spring or last February, I believe it was. He led his team to the Big School State Championship in South Dakota, accounted for 41 touchdowns, about 2,400 passing yards, a little over 500 rushing yards. So it's kind of a dual threat there. He did take a late official visit to Kansas State over the weekend. But from what I hear, that he's still signing with the Gophers. That's something to watch over the next day or so until signing day tomorrow. But I think he's somebody who looks like would be in the mix to compete with down the road with say and Ethan Kalakamanis on the roster right now.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. They've had for better, for worse, and he's had his ups and downs, but they've kind of known who their quarterback was for the last 4 years, the better part of the last 4 years, and will be again next season with Tanner Morgan. So that'll be an interesting kind of battle to watch going forward.
Yeah, it will. And what's really interesting too is seeing the effect of Kirk Shiraka, the once and now again Gophers offensive coordinator. He worked very well with Tanner Morgan in the past, and we'll see what he can do there. And then with the younger quarterbacks.
I want to get to him in a minute and the news that they extended Joe Rossi as well, but I want to stick with recruiting here for just a minute because you mentioned at the outset how much different things are now because of the transfer portal. Any area you imagine they might seek to address in particular this year, not necessarily specific people, but positions of need, and how easy is maybe the wrong word, but how kind of you can fix things pretty quick. You don't have to go the junior college route for that kind of thing anymore. It can be someone coming from another Power 5 conference like they did with a few players last year.
Yeah, well, they did address the one need so far in the secondary with Ryan Stapp out of Abilene Christian. They're hitting that pipeline again after Jack Gibbons played so well for them this year at linebacker. I would expect them, one area need defensive line. That's an area where they've lost quite a bit there this year with the guys exhausting their eligibility, and then they had a transfer in there and MJ Anderson. So I would expect that be an area where they would target. I would say any spot where they're a little thin, and that's they'll want to add depth, and I think that's the main one.
It is just so interesting how they, you used to see classes 25, 26, 27. You're just not really seeing that anymore because they want to give themselves the flexibility to add. And, it makes a certain amount of sense. It's just a different kind of ball game these days.
Yeah. And they're still accounting a little bit for that, the COVID year last in 2020 that they were granted no eligibility use. So basically that's why you have some 6th-year seniors having the ability to come back. It's just, managing that is a new wrinkle for the coaches. And
you wrote about that recently too, right? Because they just had one more offensive lineman say he's going to come back too, right?
Yeah. Center John Michael Schmitz, pretty good center, second team All Big Ten. So that was a pretty important return for the Gophers.
So in addition to Ottman Bell, Tanner Morgan, and Mo Ibrahim, they have, that's 4 pretty important offensive pieces coming back with a ton of experience.
Yeah, that should be a strength for them next year.
Well, we'll see what Kirk Shiraka can do with that. He is back, like you mentioned, left after the 2019 season, went to Penn State for a year. He was an analyst essentially for West Virginia this past year. Ironically, the Gophers will see West Virginia pretty soon in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. It seems like this has been a fairly seamless process of him coming back, even though when he left, it might not have been on ideal terms for PJ Fleck.
Yeah, he left after the regular season and just before the Outback Bowl, so the timing wasn't the best. But PJ mentioned that he was going back home. He's a Pennsylvania native. There were some family issues, were some illness in the family. He was back there for that. It didn't work out for Kirk at Penn State. He was let go after one season after the Nittany Lions finished 4-5. He lands at West Virginia in this offensive analyst role, which is not an on-the-field coaching type of situation, more of an advisory type of job. And then it worked out pretty well timing-wise, except for maybe the awkwardness of having to work out what the details of how they'd address him in the bowl game. He will not be coaching in the bowl game. PJ Fleck and Neil Brown, the West Virginia coach, came to that agreement.
Got it. And they extended Joe Rossi, maybe keep him from, a lot of teams, I'm sure, with a lot of coaching changes, I'm sure he would be a commodity because of how well, the Gophers defense, I don't think was supposed to be the strength of this year's team. And it kind of turned out to be the starring role in a lot of those wins this year. So he certainly has earned that extension. Yeah, definitely. They're
4th in the nation in total yards allowed, 9th in the nation in points allowed. And, they were very impressive this year. It started off a little tough against Ohio State and all those playmakers, but that's a defense that improved quite a bit as the season wore on.
Well, last thing for you, Randy, kind of as we think about, as I'm just kind of the wheels are turning here with kind of the band getting back together. They got the offensive coordinator that had so much success with them. They've got a lot of those key playmakers and, offensive stakeholders back. They've secured Joe Rossi, maybe a chance to get some more help on the defensive line. Just kind of peeking ahead to 2022 and their schedule and the year they're coming off of. There should be pretty decent expectations for next year, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. It's a look at the schedule, and it's really heavily backloaded, so that they'll need to basically get off to a nice start to get it going, because they do finish with 4 of their last 5 games on the road. So you got to make hay early there, I guess.
Well, we'll see how it turns out for him. We'll see if there's any surprises on Wednesday. You'll hear from PJ Fleck on Wednesday as well. Randy Johnson, good stuff. We'll catch up again soon, okay?
Okay, sounds good, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Good stuff from Randy. We'll hear more from PJ Fleck today. News conference at 1 o'clock to talk about all the players they signed. And like I said, the portal will be a big deal this year too. Can they add a few pieces to go with, a lot of those returning players, particularly on offense? Could be a pretty good year for them. Like I was talking about with Randy, the schedule early on is very forgiving. It does get tougher down the stretch, but the momentum you get from a good start can carry over. So maybe that will be a factor next year as well.
Hit me with a hot one.
Let's take a few listener questions right now. Haven't done that for a while. I always like to connect with you guys. First one from Matt Wells at Fasola Matt, longtime Randball commenter, friend. Where will the St. Thomas football, hoops, and hockey teams play long term? Is there enough money to pay for new facilities, or is there an appetite from existing facilities, example Allianz, to accommodate them? Interesting question. I ran it by Jeff Day, a colleague of mine who's been doing a lot of St. Thomas coverage for us. He said, I have to look at the numbers for football. Attendance at the moment doesn't really suggest they need to expand or move. Basketball and hockey are more interesting questions. Said he would look into it more closely, kind of been focused on just the year and on the field, on the court, on the ice stuff, but got to imagine that if this grows into something big, particularly basketball-wise and whatnot, you're going to need maybe a slightly bigger space. Hockey could find itself a good spot. I'm guessing the money would be there. It always finds a way to appear in athletics, but a good question about kind of what next steps are for St. Thomas, and hopefully we can come up with an answer down the road. Charles Ingalls wanted to know, does Taco John still have potato olays? Saw me tweeting about it yesterday that the Skyway location is now open again. I made a pilgrimage there for Taco Tuesday, and yes, sir, they absolutely still have potato olays. Why would they not? But maybe if he hasn't been there for a while, he doesn't know. But yes, absolutely a staple of the menu. Last one coming from Jeremy on direct message, wants to know, why have the Timberwolves been so much better with D'Angelo Russell in the lineup this season? It doesn't seem to make sense, particularly his impact on defense. And that's a great question, and it's hard to ignore the impact that D'Angelo Russell has had on this year's team. The Timberwolves are 12-10 when he plays. They are 0-5 when he doesn't play. Individually, when he plays, they've got one of the best starting, 5-player rotations in the entire league. And individually, he is number 8 in the league in defensive rating, 98.2. He has a net rating of 9.4. But that 98.2 defensive rating, 8th in the league, kind of astounding for a guy who did not have a reputation coming into this season for being a very good defensive player. In fact, all we could talk about in the offseason was, could the Wolves get stops if you're going to be devoting 3 of your 5 starting spots to Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and Anthony Edwards? 3 of them, 3 players who aren't the worst defensive players in the world, but who certainly have their deficiencies. Russell in particular seemed to be a weak defensive link, and here we find him number 8 in defensive rating and really being an important part of the team. So what gives? Well, I'm afraid if you're a Wolves fan, you might not love the most likely answer. And luckily, as this question was rolling in, I was reading at Seth Partnow, Anchorage Man on Twitter, does a great job. He noted that opponents are shooting 13.3% worse with D'Angelo Russell on the floor than off the floor this season. And again, maybe you look at that and think, wow, he's having a huge defensive impact. And maybe a piece of it is some improvement in the players around him, the schemes they are running. But he mixed it up with a lot of different Wolves fans when he wrote, I apologize to the Wolves fans for celebrating D'Lo's tremendous defense this season, for their impending disappointment. Splits like this in either direction don't actually tell us much about how well or poorly an individual player is defending. He chalks it up to, if history is any guide, it is overwhelmingly variance, which would tell you that, maybe the scheme is having a certain bit to do with it. Maybe D'Lo has, had an impact defensively with his positioning, with things like that. But more than likely, it is a matter of a small sample size, and this will extremely shift as the year goes on, as teams start making more shots when he is on the court. It will be as simple as that. Now, again, having watched a good number of Wolves games, I think there has been improvement on his part. I'm not going to chalk it up all to variance. I think the scheme they run is good. I like the idea of them running people off the three-point line and kind of scrambling around and just, I think it gets everybody active and engaged. But if you are counting on that to hold up for an entire season, I think Seth's point is a good one. You are going to be disappointed because more likely than not, that will fall back to the pack. I think they do have some good defensive players on the roster. Jared Vanderbilt, Patrick Beverly, Jaden McDaniels to a certain degree if he can stay out of foul trouble. Players like that, Josh Okogie, guys like that are good defensive players, have more defensive acumen and more defensive reputation than D'Angelo Russell did coming into the season. They will help the Wolves maybe settle in as a number 12 to number 15 defense for the year, give them a chance to win. But as for D'Lo's impact, which a lot of it's come on the defensive end, I think some of that will come back to the pack. I think we have seen that he's important to this team. I'm not denying that. Coming into the year, I would have put him third in that pecking order, but behind Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. Right now, he has proven to be far more valuable than I thought. We will see just how much more valuable he is as some of these numbers smooth out a little bit, and we'll get another look on Wednesday night against Denver. Let's stick with shooting for a minute or two here. Steph Curry broke the NBA all-time three-point record on Tuesday night in a game against the Knicks. Warriors won that game. Steph made, I believe, 5 threes to pass Ray Allen for the all-time lead. Gave Wolves fans a fresh reason to lament the 2009 draft when the Wolves, of course, passed twice on Steph Curry and instead took Ricky Rubio, which was a smart pick at the time, and took Johnny Flynn, which was a questionable pick at the time and grew to be a flat-out historically bad idea as time went on. But, good for Curry. He's awesome. He's an amazing player. Would have hated to see him in a Wolves uniform for these last 12 years. I can tell you that much. Gophers men's basketball team, by the way, bailed out by their own shooting in Tuesday's game against Texas A&M-Corpus Christi. Not a bad team. They came in 9-1. Gophers came in 8-1. Gophers, though, who had been very careful with the ball in their first 2 Big Ten games, only turned it over 7 times against Michigan State and Michigan combined. They turned the ball over 28 times in this game. And, if not for going 11 for 21 from three-point range and, 52.4% and shooting 58.1% overall, this might have been a different story. They were up like 26 in the second half. Let Texas A&M-Corpus Christi come almost all the way back. A lot of that sloppy play, turnovers. They do manage to get the win, though, and that's maybe our complaining about a win is another sign of expectations being raised for this program, and they do ultimately get the win, and if they can clean up some of that turnover mess, they should still be in good shape as the year goes along. Let's finish with the cooler. Wild game against Carolina, of course, postponed because of Carolina's struggles with COVID. A lot of guys on the COVID list there. Spent a lot of time on Tuesday's show talking about how COVID is wreaking havoc through sports right now, so I'm not going to go too deep on that, but Sarah McClellan will be on Thursday's show, and I'm sure we will talk more about the impact of COVID on the NHL right now. On the ice, pretty cool story developed on Tuesday. A pair of former Lakeville goalies, Jake Oettinger and Charlie Lindgren, playing against each other. Lindgren with the Blues, Oettinger with the Stars. And both of those guys having great seasons. They haven't had the most action this season, but if we just count every single goalie, they are 1-2 right now in goals against average. Lindgren followed by Oettinger. And in this game, it was the Blues getting the better of the Stars and Lindgren getting the win with 33 saves on 34 shots. But a couple of guys who both played for Lakeville North, who both went on to do bigger and better things, facing each other in net in the NHL on Tuesday night. Pretty cool indeed. That will do it for today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Be back at it on Thursday, like I said, with Sarah McClellan. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you then.